Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Brock Beard from lastcar.info coming at you after the conclusion of the South Point 400 at Las Vegas, where unofficially, pending the results of post-race inspection, Joey Logano has gone from being out of the playoffs 1 week ago after a narrow loss of points there to the disqualification of Alex Bowman that put him back in the championship. And wouldn't you know, the first week he comes back out, wins his fourth race at Las Vegas, and does so in dramatic fashion in a toe-to-toe fuel mileage strategy there with Christopher Bell, who had by far the most dominant car, and for all rights, really should have won this race after everything this weekend, but didn't quite come there to the finish there, and it was Joey Logano as your winner. I would have to say right off the bat, despite the fact that I'm going to be a little bit partial here, but the fact that I picked Logano to win back on Thursday, but I think despite that, though, this was a fantastic race. I think it had a little bit of everything for whatever you're looking for. We had big wrecks. If you're big into the playoffs, it definitely had playoff implications. Certainly a lot of drivers in contention found trouble of all kinds, and then others were finding themselves on the right end of it. We've seen the ascendancy again of Christopher Bell to again show that he doesn't deserve to be as overlooked as he often is in the Cup Series here. Yeah, I think we've had ourselves a really interesting show from today. Then to cap it all off, Doug Rice, congratulations to him on a tremendous career at the Performance Racing Network, getting to call a dramatic finish. I'm glad the finish was good for him too, and that'll be a wonderful bookend to his career at PRN as well. Just retweeted the video there that PRN posted there of him calling the finish there. But again, what a tremendous week it's been for Logano here again. I know not the most popular driver out there, has his share of detractors. You think back to, every other past championship run between him winning this race in 2022 and going on to win the title, and what he was able to accomplish back in 2018 and what should have happened in 2015 before he unfortunately got in that battle with Matt Kenseth that year. Again, this could be another, statement here as to the legacy of Logano in his career. It's hard for me to think of him as one of the series veterans, but with a lot of the young pilots out there these days, I think it certainly can be, a case can be made there at the same time. Really interesting way that everything is turned around here in this event. Joey Logano takes the win, but only by 662 thousandths of a second over Christopher Bell. Bell came very close. What was he, about 7 or 8 seconds back there in the last 10 laps of the race there, able to kind of claw his way back up into contention, getting around Daniel Suarez towards the end there after Logano had passed him earlier. Just all kinds of moving parts going on there. And again, Lee Diffie did a great job covering it here, leading the broadcast group and everyone else. Just an amazing turnaround there as well. Oh, good. I'm glad the chat's working. I kept seeing that nothing was happening there. I don't know if everybody was just shocked or just angry or what. We'll see what the temperature of everything is. There you go. I'm not going to say I'm the biggest Joey Logano fan either. Again, I think 2015, both drivers shared a share of the responsibility for how that played out. As much as I thought it was impressive that Logano swept that one round of the playoffs there and just kind of left everybody else to their own devices, spinning Kenseth in the process was probably not the wisest strategy there, regardless of what was happening back then. But that was then, and this is now. And we now find ourselves in the very real possibility with him punching his ticket for the championship that he can, keep this even year streak going and pull off another title there, too. In fact, running a paint scheme that he finished last at Vegas in the spring race. I believe last year he won the pole for this race and got in an incident where his car also caught air, didn't flip over like we saw with Tyler Reddick in the race today. But we did see an incident in that particular race as well that damaged the underside of his car, and he wasn't able to keep continuing there too. But again, a great job by Logano. Great job by Suarez too. I know he's kind of overlooked a bit in this. Of course, he was trying some different strategy even midway through the race that got him up front another time too. If memory serves, he also was a driver that's finished last in this race in the near future. And I believe this was the one where when he was driving for the Gaunt brothers a couple of years ago, that he had trouble actually kind of getting to the start of the race, that he had mechanical issues at the beginning. Definitely not a track that I would think he would have the most success at. But getting a third place finish out there, and his Trackhouse teammate Ross Chastain in seventh, fine day for them, even though they're not playoff contenders. Just a great run in general for the both of them there. Speaking of drivers outside the playoffs, Alex Bowman himself, after the disqualification, which came up after we concluded our show last week, certainly didn't see that coming with what happened there at the end. But Bowman had a fantastic race out there today. Just didn't quite work out in the final stretch run there, him finishing in the 5th spot there. Truex finishing 6th, again, probably one of his best all-around races of this year, with so much bad luck that he's had at one point or another. Good to see him get some final good runs there in his last couple of starts there for Joe Gibbs Racing. Chastain again there in 7th, ahead of Denny Hamlin in 8th. One of the playoff drivers whose problems actually were not the most severe compared to other drivers out there, but still had just countless hoops to jump through. It seemed like all the biggest names in this race had all kinds of problems, and it's certainly going to make plenty of highlight reel footage here for whoever does ultimately get the championship. Many drivers in this race may well have lost it. And I know they got 2 more shots here to win at Homestead and Martinsville, 2 tracks that require very different skills even from this race. And so it's anybody's guess how things are going to shake out here in these final couple of rounds. Denny Hamlin in the 8th spot there had multiple issues on pit road, a loose wheel at one point, having to back into his stall. Just any kind of series of problems there. Just a messy race, as Hamlin described in his interview, which I think surprised him as well. Very similar to the issues that they had back at Kansas at the same time. And again, a driver that's still looking to get his first win in a very long time. It's much has been said about these drivers being the 8 that you would more or less expect to be in contention to punch their ticket into the championship for. But a lot of these drivers still haven't won. If we're talking about wins being so central, and I've definitely spoken out a lot about the transactional nature of wins before, but I think it's still worth mentioning the fact that Hamlin has taken such a long time since his last win, back when he was winning all those races, the Mavis car, and the win back at Dover earlier this year. William Byron finishing 4th, same deal with him. Luckily, Martinsville comes up in a couple weeks, scene of his most recent win back in April. But Byron himself, really, this is probably one of the most solid runs we've seen out of him in a very long time. So again, there's, if in this system where situational winning is so important these days, it still is interesting to see so many of these contenders get there without really a lot of that behind them. Yes, you have drivers that did have multiple wins. Byron certainly was good for those first 8 races of this year. Of course, your Daytona 500 champion. But again, it's been a very different story with all these different winners that we had down the stretch, not to mention how they filled up the playoff grid there at the same time. So, again, Hamlin in the 8th spot, and don't want to overlook John Hunter Nemechek. Finally, a solid run. I believe he was good at the New Hampshire race when they were running the different wet weather tires and all the chaos of that one. But in this event here, where he was really fighting a brutally tight car, and really both of his teammates were struggling. Jimmy's struggles continuing in the 84 car, Eric Jones with a loose wheel at one point. But John Hunter Nemechek getting a 9th place finish. That's so good to see. This is a driver that I still think is one of the overlooked talents in this sport. Again, I felt like even when he was in the championship for last year for Joe Gibbs Racing, I felt like he wasn't taken seriously as a contender, despite the fact that he had won so early in the year at Fontana, was so good at Daytona and set the tone early. He didn't get nearly the attention that drivers like, a Justin Allgaier or a Cole Custer would even get. And that was unfortunate. And, now, of course, I'm not going to pretend that Legacy Motor Club has not been struggling a lot this year, because they absolutely have. And it's been disappointing to see, despite their shift from Chevrolet to Toyota. I would say they've probably been even worse this year than last season. Regardless, though, it's good to see a good run out there. And also, honestly, seeing a Nemechek in the 42 car having a good run. Certainly mentioning that back at New Hampshire, given, of course, the history with his father winning his first race out there. I know there was some significance to that, too. But then Chris Buescher behind him rounding out the top 10. Many of your other playoff drivers are pretty well scattered through this field. Very different from a typical Las Vegas race, I would say, in these last couple of years. We had Kyle Larson with a absolutely catastrophic pit stop. Denny Hamlin may have had several problems on pit road, stopping short, loose wheels, and so forth. But that single stop there where Larson came in and jack dropped too soon, and the crew was really having trouble with one of the wheels, didn't get the left rear wheel off, had to send him back in again. It looked like at first he was going to be multiple laps down. Luckily, they were still in position to just be one down and actually get it back with one of the cautions there. But again, a decent recovery for them. An 11th place finish after all that had happened. Again, that really shows just where these championship caliber teams can really step up, and that would be considered a bad day for a team like this. Maybe not as bad as the wreck he had in Atlanta or the issues they had at Kansas after the flat tire. But again, another fantastic recovery. Bubba Wallace, we didn't see as much out of him in this one. He's, of course, been very good at this track before. Again, they're looking at other drivers outside the playoffs there. But a 12th place finish there, a solid run for him. Seeing a mention here of Kyle Busch. Desert Fox, seeing your comment there about Busch being kind of quiet today. Good to see him have a solid run in that FICO car. Of course, memory serves, that was a car that he drove backwards after spinning out at Bristol when all the tires were coming apart. And then that awful, awful race he had at New Hampshire where he just hit everything but the jackpot out there. Good to see that sponsor get a good run out there. I'm sure that they appreciate that as well. Although, of course, he wasn't really as much of a factor really in the win itself throughout the event there. Regardless, a 13th place finish for him as he now comes down to the final 3 chances to break his own winless drought this year. And again, I think that's going to be really tough. You know, again, these last couple of rounds, especially after we're seeing some of these other drivers much further down the standings here and their performances at Homestead in the past, I think it's going to be even more difficult to beat one of these round of 8 drivers in these races. And again, some of them may not have won for several weeks, but they're still going to be very, very difficult to beat with a spot in the Phoenix Championship to be settled there as well. So that's going to be something to certainly look at. Corey LaJoie, great run for him in the 14th spot. Harrison Burton behind him in 15th. Harrison was in the bottom 5 there for a lot of the opening laps. Justin Haley got a lot of mention in this broadcast here when he was battling in the top 10 on the restarts. Ends up back in the 17th spot there at the finish. Again, a solid performance there for him. Daniel Hemrick getting involved in the incident there with Austin Dillon at the beginning of the race. Dillon ends up with his 5th last place finish of his Cup career, the first of the season. We'll talk a bit more about that here in just a moment. Looking further back, Eric Jones, John Hunter's teammate, back home in the 25th spot. Jimmy Johnson, 2 laps down in 28th, the other teams there. Shane Van Gisbergen had a very difficult afternoon in the Xfinity race yesterday. He ends up 2 laps down in this race as well, finishing in the 29th spot. Again, a track that he seems to really be having struggles with, but as we would imagine, him adjusting to the oval tracks is something that's going to be a storyline that we look at a bit further down the line here as well. Ty Gibbs spun out towards the end of the race there, finished in the 30th spot there. And then you get down to these other drivers here that really have a lot of work cut out for them here in these next couple of weeks. Tyler Reddick, first among them there, finishing in the 35th spot, and a flip, no less, on the front straightaway. We had seen other incidents, and thank you to a lot of people on social media here that were showing a lot of examples of this. Back to Josh Wise even hopping one of the Go Green racing cars through the infield grass. Same issue where you have that transition from the grass to that infield outlaw track to the grass again. Gets just enough air underneath the car. We haven't really seen a flip necessarily like this, not in NASCAR, of course, at this track. There were some references, at least not in a Cup Series race. There was some mention of a Busch Series practice that involved a pretty serious accident, but unfortunately no footage of that to really go into. But in the case here with Reddick, just a bizarre situation. Thankfully, he's okay. Usually when you see these situations, the cars flip over. They usually are situations that are not too serious. But definitely another point in the discussion here about the next-gen car, if it's more prone to flipping over and so forth from what we've seen this year. The statistic that was brought up a bit earlier here, where was that? Was that Seth bringing that up? I believe it was. Yes, it was Seth Eggert bringing this up here. The last time that there were 4 flips in a single NASCAR Cup Series season was back in 2009. 3 of those at Talladega, but one of them actually involving our race winner today, Joey Logano, when he flipped down the banking at Dover during an early pileup in that race here. This season, just very bizarre, where you're having him at tracks again, like Michigan, like here at Vegas. Again, much can be said still about the entire under tray on the car, the diffuser under the back of the car, and whatever else. Just the fact that that entire bottom of the car and all the other pieces and everything being as smooth as they are, hard to tell, because in this particular case, it seemed like the car rocked to the left. And, again, it just kind of like an off-camber bounce there, and air not traditionally getting under the car. You would usually imagine, like we've seen in the issue that Corey LaJoie had in Michigan, where the car would kind of rock the other direction. Here, I think in this case here, it's just that transition between the grass and the asphalt. Probably could be pointed at as much as anything else. Obviously, we've seen the changes at Daytona. We've seen also the increase in the use of artificial grass at a lot of these tracks. I'd hate to see that happen at a lot of these tracks. Just at least the beauty of just having just nice, clean grass out there just doesn't add something really interesting to the track. But obviously, you don't want it to become a safety issue, to the sense that these cars are running so close to the ground, and that even an incident like this, where the track maybe isn't the fastest on the circuit, could end up in the situation with the car flipping over. Again, I'm not sure if I could blame the car as much on this one, as, again, we've had other incidents where cars did catch air going through that transition. And I think if you got that pavement grass, the grass pavement grass thing, any car is going to find themselves in a situation where at least air is going to get under there. You could have a different one, but it'll be interesting to see if there's any other reports about what exactly happened with the car. Imagine NASCAR is going to look at it much as they did with LaJoie's after Michigan, but we'll find out if that's going to be the story there at the same time. But Reddick ends up 35th, well down in the point standings, not what they were going for at all. Had a very fast car at the beginning, started on the front row, looked like they were going to have a good shot at it. Unfortunately, not meant to be this week. However, next week at Homestead, and Reddick is one of the best drivers out there at running the high lane. In fact, finished second in an Xfinity Series race here, won an Xfinity race, driving for Richard Childress Racing. And then had another one with Our Motorsports where he was unsponsored and finished second, but then he got disqualified for reasons not relating to his own driving there. But again, it's a track that really suits his driving style, but he's not the only one for sure. The other thing with Homestead, and I think one of the things that makes it such a good championship venue, is that it can be really wide open, that people can run any number of grooves. Yes, you're going to want to kind of hug the high lane there these days with these cars. But again, if it's a matter of trying to pass somebody or maybe staying out on old tires, much like we saw in today's race, you can really get the field fanning out 3 and 4 wide and kind of having a crazy situation result. And that was certainly the case that we saw on that restart with the Reddick incident out there. Several other drivers involved, including Austin Cindric, which I was surprised didn't really get mentioned on the broadcast. There was one of the replays, I believe it was from Keselowski or Blaney's car, that showed Keselowski slide back up the track. This got Blaney into the outside wall. I guess it was Blaney's on board because he had actually bounced off the wall. But you can see an orange car in front of them also getting spun out, and that was Cindric, who actually lost a couple laps during that and ultimately did fall out of the race. I don't know if it was because of the damaged vehicle policy or if there was something else that was going on with the number 2 car, but regardless, he ends up in the bottom 5 there in the 34th spot. Chase Elliott managed to clear the crash clock after getting involved in that. I'm sure it did a ton of damage to the under tray and the diffuser and the strakes and everything else underneath the car there. But regardless, the team was able to clear the crash clock, get him back behind the wall. He ends up 37 laps down. I'll be curious if that actually lists him as finishing the race under power or not, because I believe he was about 26 laps down when he came back out from the garage area after clearing the clock there. But regardless, this would have been a fascinating race to see in person. Unfortunately, we weren't there at the track this time around, but Vegas track is a gorgeous track. It's got great amenities. It's very accessible. The Neon Garage is great for navigating it, especially for what I do in the garage area there. You get a real easy access from the entrance of pit road, which is kind of where I like to stage myself at most tracks here. But again, this was a really crazy one. It's actually probably best it was back here to be able to kind of track what was happening from one driver to the next, although Austin Dillon's wreck had pretty much settled things at that point. And certainly got to mention that one too. An absolutely brutal incident there in turn 3 after Dillon crashed into the outside wall. Seemed like it was going to be, I think it was honestly just a racing deal. I think in that particular case there, Daniel Hemrick was looking to make a move to Dillon's inside. Dillon himself looked like he was going to make a move to the inside lane just to kind of hang on to that groove. Maybe he was setting up a pass on somebody in front of him. I think it was just 2 cars occupying the same space at the same time. And, probably in any other circumstance, it wouldn't have been a problem. But both of them just try to go for the same spot, and you just end up getting a wreck. I think it was just completely accidental. I don't see anything that seems to indicate that Hemrick did anything more. We'll see if there's anything else on social media or whatever there. But Hemrick seemed pretty confused as to how it happened over the radio. It seemed like it was a pretty, it was a pretty good bump getting into the back of Dillon's car. But again, I think that neither of them knew the other one was there or if that was going to happen. And thankfully, Dillon was okay because that was a savage hit. A bit of an overcorrection on Austin Dillon's side there. That definitely got the car skating up the track there. But slamming the right front that hard where the right front wheel is pushed against the firewall is definitely something you don't usually see too much with this car. Certainly not in a single car accident like that. So glad to see him get back out of the car okay. Tons of fluid out of that car as well. The onboard camera showed a lot of stuff all over the windshield there, but that's going to definitely be something to kind of look at there too. But good to see him get out of the car okay, although certainly not under the circumstances he certainly wanted to. Again, his 5th last place finish, his first since the Fall Texas race of last year, so he now joins this continuing to be a pretty tight battle for the last car lead. I believe Ryan Blaney will still be the leader in that after being your last place starter in the race today, but him only able to get up to 32nd after being involved in the same Reddick incident there at the same time too. Just a rough afternoon for him. But the first last place run for the number 3 in a Cup Series race at Las Vegas. The first for Austin Dillon, I believe, as well in Las Vegas. And again, a early exit there for that team there as well. So that will be the story pending the results of post-race inspection here at the same time. Randy Bowman mentioning the Carl Long flip in 2004. You had Rockingham. Yep, you got the same thing. Having a situation like that at a really weird track, but again, a car that didn't have, the under tray, the diffuser, all this, this under the car aerodynamic package that we have now. You still had a situation where a car flipped under just really bizarre circumstances there. But again, no 2 wrecks are the same this way. And it'll be interesting to see how that all shakes out. But again, I think this race in general, very enjoyable. And, it seems like there's been so many races we've had over the last few weeks, certainly on the Xfinity Series side, where it's like, we had something going pretty well. And then, again, late race caution happens, or there's some bad officiating or something that just gnarls it up. And unfortunately, the finish kind of overshadows the race that preceded it. Certainly, we've had some great races on the super speedways that kind of fall under that category. I'm so glad this race was able to play out. It would have been terrible if there was a caution towards the end of this one, and we wouldn't have been able to see if Logano had enough fuel to make it to the finish. These things do happen, although it seems like it's been increasingly more common, really, in this series lately. And this is very relevant in our discussion of the Xfinity Series race last night, which we'll certainly get into here on tonight's show. We'll talk about the Cup Series race here a bit more. We'll talk about the Xfinity Series race. Also talk about the special video that I posted earlier today, which was not NASCAR related, but I wanted to put it up this morning so I'd be able to discuss it on the show here tonight. So if you haven't checked that out, that is on my Twitter feed as well, and we'll go into that. But again, looking at the bottom 5 here, Austin Dillon, again, your last place finisher after just 61 laps. Brad Keselowski involved in that incident there with Reddick. Swept up the track and got into Blaney. Blaney ended up 8 laps down by the finish of this race after a right rear toe link issue, and he got stuffed into the wall. Again, Cindric seemed to be caught up somehow. It still wasn't clear exactly how Cindric was involved. Big thanks to a lot of the fans that were sharing pictures, though, from the track here. In particular, Daniel Edwards was sending some great pictures from the stands there at the exit of the tri-oval, and I retweeted those, so definitely check those out if you haven't had a chance to see those at the same time. But kind of catching the action there. Again, beautiful track there and great amenities. So again, we'll be covering that again one of these days here soon. So, bottom 5 there, Keselowski in the 36th spot, Reddick 35th, Cindric 34th, and the 33rd spot going to Chase Elliott. Very high attrition in this race. Another driver that you usually see down there, Michael McDowell, has had like a lot of bad luck at this track. This time around gets a lead lap finish in the 20th spot. Right behind him, Cody Ware actually finishing on the lead lap, the last car on the lead lap, which was a solid run there for them as well. So again, some solid runs out of multiple teams, really. We'll go into the Xfinity portion here as well. Yeah, Xfinity Racing is Moon Racing senior comment here as well. NASCAR looks like a completely different sport. Xfinity is a great product. Yeah, exactly. I mean, again, it's amazing just with this completely different car that races and just how differently it comes together. But again, I think in terms of a next-gen race, in general, especially on a mile-and-a-half track, which has always kind of been the strong suit of this car. It was good to see just an old-fashioned battle to the finish about, yeah, does this guy have enough time? Does this guy have enough fuel? Lap traffic being a factor. Can you get through this traffic quick enough? There were so many races, even in the era where Jeff Gordon was dominant, or much later when Jimmy Johnson was dominant, you would still have a lot of races that would play out that way because you didn't have stages. It wasn't guaranteed that you're going to have a lot of cautions or very few. That could be the case at a short track just as much as it could be at a mile-and-a-half or anything larger than that. But this was something close to that. I'm glad that at Vegas, it seems, and the Xfinity race even yesterday felt like it was a nice length so that things could play out a bit more naturally despite having the stages. I was actually kind of surprised how long the Xfinity race really felt, being just 67 laps shorter, of course, than today's race here. So really pleased with it, though. I think that this was a pretty entertaining race. We'll see what happens in post-race inspection. If things get even more bizarre here, I guess we'll find out. But that'll be another thing to look at here at the same time. So, again, congratulations to Logano and winning over Christopher Bell. Again, 662 thousandths of a second. Bowser Jr. XD, I don't know if you're in here, but I'm sure we'll get some more statistics on this here, too. But, yeah. You know, I'm kind of thinking, again, going into, where was that stat? I was bringing up that I was kind of trying to predict where things were going here. And I know I had Logano on my fantasy team here, but I tried to say some other stuff on that. I'm trying to remember where I had that. Is that my bookmarks? I guess that's probably where it is. Yeah. Yeah, there we go. Further predict, Logano wins Vegas, Reddick or Larson wins Homestead. Larson gets Martinsville. Hamlin points his way in with Reddick if the 45 doesn't win. Title comes back down to Logano beating Larson. I mean, that feels like a very real possibility. But again, just the first week, who knows? Things could go completely sideways here. But I do think Reddick and Larson are going to be very tough in this next race. I mean, Larson looked practically unbeatable there the last couple of years. Of course, last year he got into the barriers there at the entrance of pit road. Ryan Blaney, who was on just a hot streak there at the end on his way to the championship, was able to capitalize on that and have a good finish out there. You know, it could be that situation again. You never know. It's going to be interesting to certainly find out here at the same time. But again, especially with the amount of points that they got to make up here too, trying to get a win and then just letting everything kind of settle itself out is probably the easiest way to do it, but much easier said than done here at the same time. Jimmy Clements, thank you for also mentioning Bobby Gill. That does deserve a mention there as well. And I'm surprised the broadcast didn't mention it because Grant Enfinger just won Talladega recently in the Truck Series and not only had Bobby Gill's name on the side of that truck there when he won the race, which is great, being able to bring his name to victory lane, but ran a Bobby Gill throwback earlier this year. Yeah, sad news from this past week here. Driver that was, you know, a very big name on the short tracks here. You mentioned the Hooters Pro Cup. I was always thinking back to the older broadcasts. They talk about Gary St. Amant and stuff in the ASA series and so forth. But Bobby Gill is another name that always came up. Winner of the Snowball Derby. You know, again, a driver. I confess I did not follow his career as closely, but I definitely know of him from that career. Very much in the same, you know, stretches. You know, again, drivers like Ty Majeski and Gary Bradbury and other competitors that, you know, worked their way up from the ranks there. And again, it was sad to hear that, you know, he's dealing with health issues and then the news earlier this week as well. So condolences to the friends and family of Bobby Gill himself. And again, kudos to the efforts over at the CR7 team to really keep his memory alive. I anticipate I'm sure that's going to be part of their effort again when they come out this week running the number 9 truck here this weekend at Homestead. Enfinger, of course, now making the next round of the playoffs already with his win at Talladega, and we'll see how things go on that end there as well. But I'm surprised the broadcast didn't really mention him as well. He was certainly not an obscurity in racing here as well. And a lot of those, you know, those short tracks and those developing series, you have some drivers that just stayed in those circuits and just, you know, were kind of they found a level that they were comfortable with, and that was just kind of where they were. And a lot of new drivers that maybe had ambitions beyond NASCAR. I don't know if that was the case with Bobby or not. But again, it may just be that a lot of drivers that compete these days really were able to kind of cut their teeth racing against drivers like that as well. So that'd be another one to certainly look at the same time. Let's see here. Let's go into, we'll get into the Xfinity Series race here as well. I'm just looking to hear the results here. Of course, if you have any other questions here from this weekend, I'll definitely make sure to mention here as well. Dean Tate, I see your comment there as well. Who won, etc. If you want to know, Joey Logano won over Christopher Bell. If you missed the first part of the show here, 662 thousandths of a second, the margin of victory. Bell trying to come back with fresher tires and a full fuel tank, and seemed like enough time to reassume the lead. But Joey Logano trying a bit of a different strategy, winning it on fuel mileage there. Kudos to Ryan Blaney, again, mentioning him losing laps there. Yes, there was a bit of help there from the teams. I'm sure there was help between the Joe Gibbs racing efforts to help Christopher Bell as well. It's the gamesmanship that's out there. But as we recall from the Rick Mast and Harry Gant thing from Talladega way back in 1991, as long as they're not basically pushing you across the finish line on the last lap, which in that case there was a bit more, gray, I would say, than a case of black and white. Again, it worked out in this case here, and Logano finding his way to the finish there. So, again, we'll see what happens there in post-race inspection. Still got to pass it and everything. That could still be a situation there, too. So we'll find out if that's going to be a story there, too. I want to get into the Xfinity Series race and, again, mention just how heartbroken I am for Ryan Sieg. And, again, another tremendous effort that very well should have been his first victory, driving the same car that lost that photo finish with Sam Mayer at Texas earlier this season. Sieg was right back up there, of course, driving the 28 now, helping out one of his other 3 team cars at the program there to try to elevate them and kind of put them in a better position for next year. And I think that, probably the one positive you could look at from this race is they certainly accomplished that, with Sieg finishing with stage points in both stage 1 and stage 2. And really putting together, I think, one of the best drives of his career. We've seen some great runs at the super speedways. Of course, there you kind of have to look at things a little differently because you have drivers that can really find themselves in the mix from, one draft that's, badly timed or timed at the right time or anything. But these other races here at like the non-downforce, the downforce tracks rather than the super speedways here, I think Sieg's run here was very impressive, much like we saw out of him in Texas with the same car. The fact that he was able to kind of slice his way through traffic. In Texas, I think he was way too conservative, running higher up the track, and Mayer capitalized on that and ended up making a race out of it there at the finish. But in this one here, I thought Sieg was doing everything right. The only slip-up he had was racing underneath Allmendinger there towards the end, getting loose up the track. Did a great job saving it, and in fact was almost made up the entire ground that he had lost to the point when the caution came out for Sammy Smith's damaged car, breaking down the back straightaway and then somehow refiring its engine and then making it back to pit road under that caution. At least that's what the indication seems to be. I don't believe he got pushed back there. But a bit of dubious circumstances there as well, certainly with Justin Allgaier still being a factor in that one and trying to get back into the battle for the win as well, with Allgaier coming home third. But Sieg, I was very impressed with his drive there at the end, reeling in A.J. Allmendinger. Again, a little bit of a slip, reeling him in again. And, again, if it stayed green, like we saw in today's race here, it seemed like he was very in good position to not only catch and pass Allmendinger, but put a pretty good lead on him there, maybe a half second or so, at least by the finish there in the final laps. Unfortunately, it wasn't meant to be. We did get a restart there, and Sieg did about as good as one can do in an overtime finish. An overtime finish that I guess didn't necessarily need, or I guess it did finish in regulation. It was 201 laps in this case here, but basically a 2-lap sprint to the finish anyway. But still, was able to get right back to Allmendinger's bumper. If AJ slipped up a little bit, it would have been another situation there where, maybe he could have, done something there like Mayer did. But unfortunately didn't quite work out, and just over a car length margin there. I just hate it for him. I mean, that team is full of some really hard-working guys. I'm sure their day is going to be coming at some point or another here. They're getting too good to not have that happen. And it's been such a long road. I'm glad Rick Allen, even as much as I'm not a big fan of his play-by-play, I'm glad he was at least addressing the fact that it's been an even longer streak than Jeremy Clements before he won that famous race at Road America a few years ago. And now Clements, since winning another race at Daytona, again, Sieg has been in that position so many times, and he's had so many situations where he's restarted the front of the field and things didn't quite shake out, races at Atlanta and so forth, at the super speedways. Man, they're just like, they're right on top of it here. They're about as close as you can get. Sheldon Creed close, really, at this point, which is really something to be saying. The fact that Creed has been driving for, the major Cup affiliated teams like Joe Gibbs Racing, and before that, Richard Childress. Here's a team that's really been trying to cobble something together on its own. Yes, with some support from Ford, and I'm sure the other alliances with other Ford teams out there, given the fact that there's not that many Fords in the Xfinity series. But regardless, again, I think he just put together a great show out there. They looked very strong. I don't know if the day is going to happen for him this year. But again, it really says something that when you had a playoff spot on the line and you're like, oh, well, it's all about, is it going to be Chandler Smith or Justin Allgaier or AJ or any of these other guys? You still have this guy in the mix here that could really play spoiler and try to have that moment. And we saw that out of Riley Herbst just last year, being able to win in dominant fashion. In fact, in this race to finally win. And then, of course, after that win, being able to come back and win Indianapolis this year. Hopefully when Sieg gets to that point, we're getting there. I'd say Kyle Sieg has had some times, he's been close to being competitive as well. More so, I would say, last year than this year. This year, it seems like it's been more of a struggle with them running as many cars as they have. And whatever's going on with the 38 team there with Matt DiBenedetto as well. Since that's now been mentioned more as the Viking Motorsports team, and what shape is that going to take since it's still really an RSS effort. We'll see if anything changes on that next season. But again, I think that they're putting together a good season. They were fun to watch. I think that it made for another really good race. If we didn't have that restart at the end, I think it would have been a perfectly dramatic finish there under green. Unfortunately, didn't work out there. I'll give Sammy Smith the benefit of the doubt because the issue he had could well have been the same issue that Shane Van Gisbergen had in yesterday's race. Shane had a problem with the fuel pump and the regulator and the carburetor that forced him behind the wall 3 times in the beginning of this race here. Only completed 77 laps, but it really wasn't until about 50 to go that they actually parked the car for the race because he couldn't gain any more spots out there. So that was kind of the different situation out there. Blaine Perkins, Death Killer. Yes, thank you for mentioning that. The other RSS entry. Can't overlook him either. And the beautiful Kevin Harvick scheme they ran this weekend. And some great runs that they've had, too. Again, I wouldn't overlook Perkins for some of his strong performances here as well. But we'll see how things shake out on that end. But again, mentioning Shane Van Gisbergen getting his first Xfinity Series last place finish to go with his first Cup last place run at Chicago earlier this year. So that was the storyline from yesterday. That article already on the lastcar.info page if you haven't checked that out. This ended up being a pretty intense last place battle back there that started really before the race even began. Dawson Cram having a mechanical issue. The transmission was stuck in third gear. He ended up having to actually come down pit road right before the start. So when the green flag dropped, you can actually hear another engine going into turn 1, and that was the engine of Cram getting back up to speed. He ends up losing a lap there in the process. Meanwhile, Leland Honeyman has a really ill-handling car at the beginning, saves it from a spin, then moments later ends up crossing J.J. Yaley's nose on the backstretch, damaging the right front of his car. Yaley slides up the track. Caution comes out, and now Yaley stays on the lead lap. I don't know how. It seemed like that contact was going to be enough to actually take him out or, knock him laps down. Yaley managed to stay on the lead lap, but then you got Honeyman and Cram that are both multiple laps down. They're almost neck and neck there when the race restarts. Then you got they both lose the lucky dog in the process there because Akinori Ogata is really having trouble keeping pace out there. Unfortunately, dropping back in the order here. He ends up 35th in the final running order. But then also, Shane Van Gisbergen starts coming in with the first of his several issues. Lengthy pit stop, goes back to the garage area, ends up multiple laps down, multiple stays in the garage. And ultimately, that ends up being your first last place run for the number 97 since Jeff Fuller at Rockingham in the fall of 2003. Kind of surprising out there. You think the 97 would be a pretty common number in the Xfinity series, or perhaps just not as common during the Start and Park era when you had Jeff Green and other drivers of that era here that had finished in last place, but not the situation this time around. So Shane Van Gisbergen and Leland Honeyman, the only two drivers out of the race. Electrical issues ended up knocking Honeyman out of the event. Both of them out of the race, declared about 50 laps to go again when Van Gisbergen couldn't gain any more ground. Dawson Cram, Akinori Ogata, and Ryan Vargas rounded the bottom five. Vargas was actually doing a really solid job out there for the Mike Harmon team. Want to give him a shout out here on the show. Coming back from overseas, he's changed teams, at least in the short term here, driving the number 11 team in the Whelen Euro Series, still with the Critical Path Security sponsorship. Had a pretty wild race up there. They showed his car was just covered in mud from an incident that they had on track out there. But coming back stateside to run the occasional Xfinity race for the Mike Harmon team, bringing his sponsors back. They had a pretty cool car paint scheme out there. Kind of ran a two different textures of black. Like they had like a glossy black and a flat black on it. It looked pretty hip. So if you see any pictures of it there, it's certainly pretty cool looking there. But the Critical Path Security sponsorship still on board there for Vargas. Was battling for a lead lap finish. Potentially, if things shook out a different way, they could stretch their tires to a certain extent. They're going to maybe get a good finish. Unfortunately, they ran out of fresh tires there. These teams don't have quite as much resources as others. Running scuffed tires from the beginning of the race, it just dropped them back in the order, and they ended up laps down and finishing in the 34th spot out there, but with the car in one piece. So again, something positive to look forward on. So again, I think that they were definitely out there that night, definitely having a good run. Just unfortunately didn't shake out for him. JJ Yaley, giving him a shout out as well, mentioning again that earlier incident on the back straightaway there with the Leland Honeyman car. Yaley coming back to finish in the 25th spot, 2 laps down there at the finish, so kudos to him on that. Looking at other drivers through here, Corey Heim just outside the top 10. Again, whatever happens after this year's Truck Series season, I think he's going to find a good place out there. Has he locked up a ride for next year? I'm trying to remember. I got to look this up here offhand. I thought he had something in the pipeline there. But maybe that's something that's still up in the air. Definitely mention the chat, because I'm sure I'm overlooking that at the same time here too. Daniel Dye was really good in the colleague effort, despite all the struggles for Shane Van Gisbergen, and certainly overshadowed by Allmendinger's win. A great run there for Daniel Dye there in the almost in the top 10, finishing in the 12th spot for him there at the same time. Don't have too much more to say on that. Certainly the battle between Sieg and Allmendinger was kind of central to that there too. Chandler Smith and Allgaier seemed to be very fast in that one. Didn't quite have the long run speed at the end there. Another driver to have to mention here, Myatt Snyder. Good to see him back out in the Xfinity Series. We haven't seen him since the spring race at Martinsville earlier this year. So to come back out here in one of these late fall races and actually have a run out there for Bobby Daughter's team. He finished 2 spots ahead of Yaley. Took home the 23rd spot there. So kudos to him on that one. And again, a team that's still looking to get the best runs they can. They seem to change drivers just about every week. They had Nathan Bird in the 14 car, the Roval just recently. Again, it's really hard to kind of get stability there in that sense. But if any kind of solid finishes you can get with the car in one piece and you're on the lead lap, good job for him. Myatt, I know, has been working on really hard on trying to get rides locked up. Seemed like every race we went to this year, he was always there on pit road, helping out or just maintaining a presence out there. And that persistence certainly paid off, at least getting a couple rides this year. We'll see if things change the next couple of weeks or into next season. Obviously, drivers, in all circuits, really trying to lock things up for next year. That'll be another thing to certainly look at the same time. Yeah, who's going to drive the 97 in Xfinity next year? Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm kind of going to be missing that if they're going to do this whole thing with the 88. I still got mixed feelings about it. I'm sure that it's probably done to kind of be a step for Junior Motorsports to get, further up the ladder and so forth there. But I like that they addressed that at least to kind of talk about, the history that number, like the 888 at least has in the Supercar series there as well in Australia. But again, maybe something we'll figure out into that a little bit further along the line there. But again, I'm going to be missing the 97 as well. I mean, I think the scheme looks sharp. Even when it's just that plain white WeatherTech car, I think it's a great paint scheme. I hated to see it struggle here this past week, but that's just part of the nature of it. I didn't mention Sheldon Creed as well, starting in the back of the field there after engine trouble in practice, finishing in the 9th spot there, so kudos to him. Decent run, not second place, but again, we got a couple more races to see if that story has a different ending. I still predicted that, and I wasn't the only one kind of thinking this here, certainly with the struggles that he's had this year, certainly trying to break through and get that first win, so reminiscent of what we saw out of Daniel Hemrick, maybe doing the same thing in the 18 car there and being able to win in a walk-off there before he changes teams, much like we saw happen with Hemrick as well. But I'm not sure if that's going to be the case or not here. It's going to be a difficult battle there at Phoenix there in a couple of weeks. So we'll see if that's going to be the situation. But we're almost getting to the point here where we're going to be looking at last car championship battles here again. It's almost certificate printing time, so it's going to be something coming down to this. Let me kind of pull this up here in the meantime. I want to kind of look at this. Pulling up the Xfinity Series standings here, Sam Mayer is still the leader in those standings with 2 last-place finishes, 8 bottom 5s, and 9 bottom 10s. He has a 1 bottom 5 finish advantage over Dawson Cram, who again struggled as well after the start of the race this past week, even driving for DGM Racing. So he's still firmly in contention here too. Also in contention, 3 other drivers that have 2 last-place runs but only 4 bottom 5s. They could very easily get up to the lead the standings with another last-place finish. Those are Kyle Weatherman, Patrick Emmerling, and Riley Herbst. And then also the part-time driver Akinori Ogata, mentioned again earlier in the race here, with 2 last-place runs and 3 bottom 5s and 3 bottom 10s. For those of you scoring at home, the bottom 5s and bottom 10s are, again, the tiebreaker that I usually have here in this, rather than trying to have a situation where it's not always going to somebody that's just a part-time driver, is just having some bad luck. I'm kind of looking at whenever they finish in, 5-position increments from the bottom of the field and have those kind of be the tiebreaker. Applying this retroactively to the sports history in all 3 series, it hasn't really been necessary to have a tiebreaker really too much further past bottom 15 or a bottom 20 finish there. At that point, you're pretty much just kind of doing the tiebreaker on starts. But this has so far kind of been the system. If there's any need to change that, there'll be something further down the line. But yeah, if we're down to these last couple of races here between Homestead, Martinsville, and Phoenix, anything can happen. Nobody's locked up anything. And you have 6 drivers that have 2 last-place finishes each, and you have many other drivers that just have 1. Any one of them could get on a streak like we saw with Kyle Sieg last year, where he finished last in 2 of the last 3 races, I believe it was. That was just enough to actually take the lead in that case. It could be in the same situation there, too. We'll look at the Truck Series standings, too, because I know we haven't had that in a bit since the Talladega race here, and that was with Bailey Curry being your last-place finisher. In that case, the only repeat last-place finisher in the trucks is Mason Massey, who still has the lead with 2 last-place runs, 4 bottom 5s, and 5 bottom 10s. The next 2 drivers behind him both have 13 bottom 10 finishes, so if they merely get a second last-place finish, they could be right up there in the lead. One of them is Thad Moffitt, who we've seen increasingly out of the number 46 truck lately. I don't know what the nature of that deal is. It originally looked like their deal was moving to Young's Motorsports. Then Thad moved back out of the truck again. They kind of got rid of the petty numbers they put on the truck there too. Not sure if there's going to be any plans for him coming back here in these last couple of races, but that could very well be the case at Homestead this weekend. The entry list will be interesting to see. Spencer Boyd right there as well, 5 bottom 5s, 13 bottom 10s. Has had a couple good runs there in the Freedom Racing Enterprises entry. However, some struggles there at the same time there at the back of the field. He's in position to potentially get a second Last Car Truck Series championship. You may recall here on the channel awarding his certificate at Phoenix a couple of years ago. I will not be at Phoenix this year. We'll certainly be enjoying it from home here as well, but I am planning on returning to that race next year for some more action with that too, and we'll see where things go on that end. Bailey Curry just joined the top 5 there with the last place run with 4 bottom 5s and 6 bottom 10s. And then from there, you pretty much have everybody down to even Kyle Busch with his first Truck Series last place run, I believe, at Darlington earlier this year. That has made things as tight as possible. So still the Truck Series, still not as close to locking up a championship, although it does have only one driver that has a repeat last place run thing. So that could be the story here coming down the stretch as well. We'll get the full story here on the Cup Series last place rankings. I'll give you the details here on what was going on coming into the race. After Bowman's disqualification, he became one of only two drivers to have, or one of only three drivers to have more than one last place run. Ryan Blaney is still the leader with three. They mentioned the 7 DNFs that he had this year, 3 of those resulting in last place runs, including the Watkins Glen and Darlington last place runs later on this year. 5 bottom 5s and 6 bottom 10s. Josh Berry is second in the standings there with 2 last place runs, and Alex Bowman with 2 of his own there, including the disqualification. So again, very close. In fact, today's second place runner, I almost said this today's winner, given the fact that he was so dominant. Christopher Bell is actually not that far out of last car contention with 1 last place finish, 8 bottom 5s, and 8 bottom 10s. Things could get very interesting here in the stretch run, especially if you have some playoff drivers that have some early misfortune. Corey LaJoie, a past last car champion here as well, with 1 last place run, 7 bottom 5s, and 11 bottom 10s. And from there, probably the other contenders that have a lot of bottom 10s here that are really close. Noah Gragson with 10, Zane Smith with 13, and Kaz Gralla with 11. These are other drivers that they would need to get at least 2 last place runs in these last 3 races now to get up there. But again, anything is possible down here too. So we're not really close to really figuring out, really eliminating anybody so much. Probably drivers just haven't had a last place run in some of these cases, certainly in Cup. But we'll have the picture made a little bit more clear here in these next couple of weeks here at the same time. Andrew Bremner, one more silly season question. What are the plans for Jordan Anderson? That'll be interesting. The thing I'm going to be most interested in is what's going to happen with their deal with the Peterson team and Austin Green, because Austin has been great this year. Again, trying to get some more oval track experience. I heard somewhere that he's potentially going to run Martinsville. We'll see if that's going to be the case here in a couple of weeks. But again, hard to tell what's going to happen there with that. I think in terms of the driver lineup they have, Retzlaff's had a kind of a rough season this year. But again, I think long-term, he's a good talent there. Jeb Burton seems solid at bringing the sponsorship in, which I'm sure for a smaller organization that helps. And again, occasionally Jeb has some good runs there too. And we'll see. We'll see what happens there. I guess it also depends on if they're going to do 3 cars or just the 2 again. I guess that'll be the other part to certainly look at. But we'll find out. That's going to be another story for sure. Alrighty. Also, for those of you scoring at home there for the last car championship, no, Harrison Burton does not have a last place run. I know that certainly after his win at Daytona, there was a lot of criticism over him getting in the playoff system, even though that's the system. That's just the way it is right now. He actually does not have a last place run this year. But Homestead last year was the site of his first in the Cup Series. I noticed that came up and kind of getting ready for the entry list storylines feature this week. But that was definitely a story coming into that. He has 7 bottom 5s, however, and 16 bottom 10s, which is more than Ryan Blaney has as a leader, and tied for the most bottom 5s with LaJoie and Berry. So that could be another factor there coming up. So again, things could be kind of a turnaround here too. Jimmy Clements, thank you for mentioning the Haley Deegan story here as well. Don't have too many thoughts on this. The Indy NXT deal with her coming into that circuit there after all the struggles she's had this last couple of years. The problems in the Truck Series, trying to get some good runs there with Thor Sport, things not working out. Going to AM Racing this year, not even running the full season. All kinds of mechanical issues, and yes, crashes as well. And now just trying something entirely different in open wheel racing. All I can do is just wish her the best of luck. As to the success she'll have, I have no idea at this point. Because again, she didn't get up into this position for no reason. She's had success in the ARCA Menard Series West and other competition there as well. Just hate to see anybody struggle that much. But maybe, again, this is a good time to try different things out. And if they're able to kind of work out these deals, her team's able to work out these deals here to kind of go from one to the next. It's certainly worth a try at this point. Stranger things have certainly happened. But again, it's hard to really predict how well that's going to go. I think that's really definitely the case. Let's see here. Yeah, so we got that too. Okay, we'll go into trivia here in a sec. I have a little something here for show and tell, and it kind of ties in with the video earlier today. But we'll get into that. Let me check my phone here as well and see if we got any other notes from the week here. Seems like it was a much busier week. We did get that bit of a update there on the lawsuit here that's going on. Yes, there we go. Yeah, the charter system. Actually, this kind of dovetails with another note I had here. I did see Slapshoe's video on the charter system situation there, and I thought that was very interesting. And certainly, it's something that, in my mind, I've kind of thought, well, I mean, this is just going to kind of work itself out, But if you really kind of look at, where the money's going or where it seems to be going, and the constant frustrations and the intensifying frustrations the teams seem to be having, this lawsuit seems like it was perhaps inevitable. Again, the very real possibility now from this announcement this past week that NASCAR may be considering having just 32 charters next year, but not reducing the size of the fields. I did not take it that way either. I think that was the case that people were looking at, saying that only 32 entries are going to be chartered potentially, nothing official yet. But of course, that would reference the withdrawal of the charters for the two existing 2311 entries and the two existing Front Row Motorsports entries, although both teams are still looking to acquire other charters. So does that mean it goes down to 30, or those charters just go to somebody else? Who knows? We're going to be kind of off script at that point. It would be an interesting situation if those teams end up being open teams and not winning something that they had attempted to get. And this was another interesting aspect of the lawsuit, of course, is that they were looking to reach another agreement with NASCAR and say, okay, well, look, can we be in a situation there where, knowing that this case is, if it goes to trial, it's not going to go to trial for another year, maybe 2 years. Can we be in a situation where we can still have charters and still have the benefits of them? And I'm sure that this is another reason that probably no other team really wanted to be in that situation. You don't want to be in a situation where you're asking for permission instead of forgiveness. That could be a really awful situation here. And yeah, NASCAR could very well just easily say, no, look, you're suing us on this. We put these letters out and said that, we believe that it's baseless and groundless and whatever else, and they're going to go with that. They could just lose those charters, period. And if they don't sign the contract, that's going to be just a massive loss of revenue. And it's pretty bold to see that this coming up, especially given the fact that, again, a big money investor like Michael Jordan is exactly what NASCAR wanted to bring into the sport. You would think that this would not be an easy decision. I don't know if it was or not, but it's just another interesting aspect of it. Now, I think realistically, does this mean there's going to be a whole lot of, I'm hearing that little Rise of the Field Fillers theme in the background. Is this a possibility that maybe other teams come into the sport and maybe make it more difficult for Front Row Motorsports or 2311 to start? I think that's a tall ask at this point, especially when you have the next-gen car being so difficult to build, so difficult to certify, how expensive it is. I don't know how many other teams are waiting in the wings out there. We've certainly seen a few more open teams this year. We've seen a few more 40-car entry lists this year, but I certainly don't see a situation where you would have so many of them that any of those teams would fail to qualify. I think they'd just be in a situation where they just start these races. They're not chartered teams. They're not getting paid hardly anything. But I think that would be the most interesting aspect of it here, because if you recall from Rise of the Field Fillers, when there was this restriction that the TV networks had, reportedly, that they had to have 43-car fields, that NASCAR actually contacted these teams and say, okay, get a car together and help us fill these fields. We haven't seen that in the charter system era, because we've seen so many fields that just had, 36 cars, and you had 4 open spots the whole time. I still think it's one aspect of this sport in the current business arrangement that just kind of squanders these positions. To have any kind of situation where 2311 and Front Row, assuming they don't get their charters back next year, assuming they lose that right, either permanently or temporarily, you're going to need a whole lot more teams to actually even make that an issue, and a lot of more teams that are capable of bumping out these cars. And I'm not even sure if, that would be, I don't know if that would be possible under the current business model when you have barely enough cars that are out there to fill these fields. So I don't think that's going to be as much of a concern. The concern, of course, is the loss of revenue, the loss of not being, a chartered program, and yeah, technically you wouldn't be able to start a race. Maybe you go to Daytona and maybe a lot of people turn up with next gen cars. And, if you get a good payday in the Daytona 500 from starting the race, that could change things. But man, I don't know if that's what we're heading towards here. I think that in that case, it's not like the teams are closing. It's not like the teams are losing assets, because that's kind of what happened in 2003 and before the 2004 streak, and then 2008 before the 2009 bit of field fillers that kind of came in there too. I don't see us in that situation, at least not at this point here. So I don't know. I mean, it's going to be very interesting to see where we're going with that, because I think if you suddenly do have a lot of entrants that maybe kind of sense blood in the water, and now there's, say it's still going to be a 40-car field, but now there's only 32 guaranteed starting spots, and you have these 4 teams that are established programs, certainly great super speedway teams too, in particular for both these programs. Is that going to open a possibility for anybody else? Well, who's that going to be? Again, you have some teams that bring out extra cars. That could be the other way. Maybe it's not so much a new team just entirely like the New York racing team or anything, but maybe it's a thing like, again, Trackhouse bringing the Project 91 car out, or Roush bringing the Stage 60 entry, which they did with David Reagan. Is that the possibility? Certainly could be, especially if some of these teams get new sponsors and they have a cap on how many charters they can have, which they do. Is that a possibility? It's going to be a really, really interesting offseason if that rumor turns out to be true. But the fact of that coming out there, and the very real possibility that maybe those teams don't get that exception where they're not able to be treated as chartered teams because they didn't sign off on this thing that they're suing NASCAR about. We could be in that situation. But I don't think we're gonna get a real firm idea of that until this offseason here. If we start hearing, again, chartered teams entering extra cars or new teams popping up, and then suddenly maybe, some bizarre situation, we get at least 44 cars on that entry list, then yeah, it could be a possibility. But then again, I mean, yeah, where does that factor in with owner points? Where does that factor in with all this other stuff? I don't think week to week, even in that worst case situation, that's going to be the biggest problem is missing races. I think the biggest problem is going to be, just a lack of any income on that side of it there, and then being more dependent on sponsors and investors and so forth. It's a tricky situation. And again, in any of these cases here where, a sanctioning body is involved, we talked a little bit about the reserve clause in baseball and how big of a change that was. The Curt Flood case is the big deal from that. It's, again, the person that attempts to do it, I mean, they're put in a really difficult situation, and maybe they make it easier for people further beyond them. But it could be something that could be really inhibit their own business, but that's kind of the risk of it there too. So I don't know where we're heading on that. But again, it's interesting stuff, and kudos to Pockrass and all these others here that are following the story just as closely here to kind of give us some more information, because it's going to give us no shortage of stuff to talk about, certainly on this show here too. But yeah, if it does create a big entry list, that's going to be really interesting for sure. Are we hearing no problems in tech, Bowser Jr.? I see your comment there as well. We'll go ahead and follow up on that here too. And let's see. There it is. Yes, 5 minutes ago, Bob Pockrass tweeting, no issues in post-race tech. Logano is the winner. No cars to the R&D center. So there you go. So Logano officially your winner. And so the official last place finisher of the race today will be, and I forgot about already, Austin Dillon. I almost said Hemrick. Austin Dillon will be your last place finisher today. So that will be your feature in the article here a little bit later tonight. So stay tuned for that here this evening. Again, started about to go into the trivia section here, and I'll talk about the video posted earlier today as well, and we'll get into that. While I do that, I'm going to go ahead and we'll bring this out here, and you guys can tell me which category you'd like me to do some questions from. on here. Again, NASCAR pits, teams, tracks, drivers, and the wild card. So again, congratulations to Logano again for the win today. I see that. Pendra McHerald, yes, indeed. But again, let me know in the chat which category you'd like. We'll do some questions here for the latter part of the show here. NASCAR pits, teams, tracks, drivers, and the wild card. And we'll do some more questions here to wrap things up. So, a little something different on the video channel today. Before I get into that too, I guess we'll mention where we are with NASCAR videos too, because of course we're moving along on that. Made some very good progress this week on the next episode of 500 Days about the spring race at Texas back in 2001. That will almost certainly be the next video that's going to be on this channel here in terms of produced content. I'm still aiming for a release sometime this month. If you're the $5 level or up in my Patreon, at patreon.com/lastcaronbrock, you will have advance access to that video. Still in the works here on getting a couple other scripts recorded here. So we'll get that going, and then that'll kind of move things down the line. I'm also very pleased to say that I have now this week recorded another script for NASCAR Man History. So he will have a new video on his channel. And if you're in the $1 and up level of my Patreon, you will have advance access to that video when it is ready. Very interesting story. I won't spoil it here. It's going to be something very interesting for sure. Definitely something that needed. I guess the one thing I'll tease here is that it's definitely one thing that's a little bit of a mystery and needed to be kind of cleared up in the sport. And so that's going to be something very interesting coming up here on his channel here too. The other video that I worked on, and I know this was a little bit of something that was kind of different here, is, again, something else new for the third channel, which is, again, the Brock's Other Videos channel out there. I know we posted the video on movie soundtracks, talking about that earlier this month, and some other content I put up there. I've just kind of had that, just kind of the background if something comes up there, especially something that's certainly off topic or just something that I'm passionate about that I kind of wanted to kind of share in this one. And this is something I'd thought about doing a video about, but then events in the news kind of moved things forward. Another topic I've been very interested in over the years is the history of ocean liners, like the Titanic, of course. And there's many channels on YouTube here. I'm sure that you can get plenty of fantastic content on that. Titanic Honor and Glory, big old boats, ocean liner designs with Mike Brady out there. Great channels out there that highly recommend it. In fact, in this video I'm describing, I put links to a lot of their channels in there if you are interested in getting the rabbit hole of that. I think the thing that's very interesting about it is just another view of travel. The thing that's kind of overlooked in the Titanic saga itself is really that was the only way to get across the ocean. I mean, getting on a ship back then was like getting on an airplane today. And in fact, that change is really the reason that they don't exist anymore. It used to be that, the only way to get across the Atlantic, and that being really the most glamorous section, I would say, of sea travel at the time was on one of these ships. And these ships were one of a kind, with beautiful interiors and everything else. And, some just so stunning that they even intimidated passengers out of traveling on them. Passengers preferred, the Queen Mary, for example. It's preserved in Long Beach, is one that is very famous for being very extravagant, but at the same time also very comfortable. Like it kind of hit the middle of the bell curve in the success of these ships, and it was another reason that it was in service for as long as it was, even during the rise of jet travel in the 1960s. So the video that I did on this, what came up is because of this ship right here, and I brought this model out here. This is a 3D printed model that Lastbro hooked me up with here a while back of the SS United States. And this is what that video is on. It's a 5-minute video on the channel here, and talking about this particular ship. This ship still stands since 1952 as the fastest ocean liner in the world. It was designed by William Francis Gibbs in an era where, again, by the 1950s, air travel was really taking off. And the age of the luxury liner was kind of ending. The Queen Mary was still the fastest ship in the world and had been since 1936. But there were many other ships that had been around in that time trying to vie for that record, trying new technology, whether it was welded hulls or turbine engines versus reciprocating engines. And all those lessons were poured into this particular ship here. And actually longer than the Titanic. I believe she was 900 and something feet long. whereas the Titanic was 882. So a very interesting ship in the world's history, and set that record, and then nobody else could beat it. And then by 1969, and after the Queen Mary was retired, and these other ships, she was retired too, because by then air travel had reached to such a point, especially with jet air travel, where, yeah, I mean, nowadays, what you see, you can go to anywhere in the world and be there within basically the same day. And certainly compared to a ship that would take multiple days, even the SS United States, where it was 3 or 4 days across the ocean, you just can't compete with that. And indeed, there was lower passenger traffic, and now it's something that's not really around. Now, you think about cruise ships these days, and again, Mike Brady does a great video on this to kind of break down the differences there. But cruise ships are not ocean liners. They're not designed for the exact same intent. I mean, for one thing, they're not designed for speed. They're not designed to actually just get you from one place to the next as quick as possible. They're exactly the opposite. They're big and bulky. They're kind of like container ships, especially, and actually the way they're designed is actually not too dissimilar from that. But they're designed to, just take it easy as much as possible. A cruise maybe a week, could be 2 weeks, could be around the world or whatever. And they're designed very differently. An ocean liner also, because of the speed, where they're going, the Atlantic liners, again, were the most successful of these. That area of the ocean was always really treacherous, so they had to be very sturdy. And even today, with the Queen Mary II or the Queen Elizabeth, the new Queen Elizabeth II, the old QE2 was retired years ago as well. Again, they're just built to a different demands because the ocean is just so unpredictable out there. And of course, temperatures out there and everything else. So, very different world. So the reason that this video came up now of all times, especially while I'm trying to produce other videos here at the same time, the SS United States is actually still with us. And it's actually been docked in Philadelphia Harbor since 1996. That's right, 1996. Many years later, she had passed from one owner to another. She'd been in this place and that. She'd been stripped of basically her interiors, and so forth. But the ship still functionally exists and has stayed afloat. Hasn't leaked any oil or sunk in any of the docks that she's been parked in. She's just been sitting there. Now, she's not been in the same case as the Queen Mary, which actually was converted into a convention center in Long Beach, and actually just recently, after COVID, actually just got the necessary funding they needed to keep it from collapsing in on itself. That was actually a very big controversy just a couple of years ago. And thankfully that was done to actually even save any of these ships that have no longer existed over the years. But the SS United States has not been that fortunate. She's just been sitting in this dock, exposed to the elements, nobody maintaining her, paint streaking and falling apart. But still staying afloat, and potentially with the United States Conservancy that had been around, I believe, since 2011, they've been really trying to kind of find a new buyer for this ship. But what happened this past week is, unfortunately, the clock had struck midnight on the SS United States. There was a very ugly debate over dock fees with the person that owned the dock that the ship was tied to. Things didn't work out that way, and they had to find a very quick second option of someplace else to move her until maybe she could be refurbished in those other positions. But, again, it could be a situation there where, somebody could fix the ship up or not. But unfortunately, the only other bidder that came up was Okaloosa County in Florida, which suggested sinking her into an artificial reef off the coast of Florida. Now, that's a nice way of just saying, well, we're going to destroy the ship. She's made out of aluminum. She's not going to particularly hold up very well as an artificial reef. The Andrea Doria, in fact, sank in 1956 and has almost crumbled to nothing in the years since then there. And unfortunately, if this goes through, that's going to be the fate of this ship. And it's unfortunate because it has been 55 years since she was decommissioned, and she hasn't been, really cared for properly. And honestly, she didn't serve long enough to really, I think, become as, to be respected as much for what she had accomplished there in the speed record. The Atlantic speed record goes so far back in history, when it was called the Blue Riband, when the Hales Trophy was minted in the 30s. It was such a point of pride, and countries around the world trying to outdo one another, like the space race, really. Like, again, we saw just this same weekend that this story came out, we saw that tremendous accomplishment that SpaceX and Elon Musk did with the rocket that was able to be retrieved. They're basically able to slow down from free fall and be captured on that pad. Tremendous advancements. That spirit is still here in this country and in this world to try to find these new advances in technology. And this was another ship that very much in her era was the the wild boundary out there back then. And it's sad to see that go. And the report is that it was originally going to be moved out of the dock on the 25th. That date has now been moved back, but it still sounds like it's going forward on there. So I want to do a video on that, and that's the video that basically is on the channel there as well. So if you haven't checked it out, it's just a 5-minute video on that. If you're interested, I know it's very different from the NASCAR content, and we'll get back into that here as well. But again, a very different, just a different subject that I've been interested in over the years, and I've been meaning to do some kind of video on. But again, if you're interested in more about the SS United States herself, there's a lot of great sources out there. I encourage you to check out not just my video, but the description in the video as well. Has more details on other channels that kind of give you more of that historical context. Because again, these ships are such interesting entities. Again, obviously an inanimate object, obviously not the same as any human tragedy out there, but there's a lot of humanity in the way these ships were designed, and certainly the way they lived. And again, one-of-a-kind things, not on an assembly line. There's so many things that are preserved that were produced in large amounts, whether it's, not just other forms of transportation, like famous cars or famous steam locomotives or any other form of technology, but just other historical artifacts that are saved and honored for what they are. It's sad to see something like this happen in this case, and it's unfortunately it's really a failure. It's kind of a staggering one. It's amazing to see something like this just overlooked. When we as racing fans were able to see North Wilkesboro come back from being just utterly forgotten. I remember hearing in the 90s, after it was torn out, I guess more in the 2000s rather, that they're saying, oh, we'll never go back to North Wilkesboro. The plumbing is a nightmare. We're never going to be able to get that fixed. The area is just not good for the sport. We've outgrown it. It's never going to happen. Never going to happen. And now we're back. All it took was Dale Jr. out there with a weed whacker, getting it ready for iRacing. And now everybody's like, yeah, okay, let's bring it back. Obviously other stuff had to happen with COVID funds and so forth and everything, but they made it work. They made it happen. And so, especially something where people said, oh, it'll never happen. And unfortunately, the same things have been said about the SS United States. She's basically just perfectly empty on the inside. She's ready to be redeveloped into anything else. And nobody's seen the value in that, even after the success of the Queen Mary and all that's been done with her. And thankfully, a lot of her interiors are still preserved. If you ever get the chance to visit out there, and I'm so glad that they fixed her up too, because again, it would be terrible to, again, have all that effort put into saving something and then not being able to maintain that. But not everything can be saved. I certainly understand that. That's another part of history. Certainly that was the case with the other great liners. Many were destroyed during the Great Depression because that was the only work that anybody could find was, the work that it offered people to tear a ship up was something much better than having it and then a bunch of people not having jobs. So I know that difficult decisions were made back then, but it stinks to see that decision being made now, especially with one that had this singular importance there as the world's fastest liner. So again, it's unfortunate, but if you are interested in hearing more about the story there, again, that video is on the channel. You can check it out. Oh, good. I haven't lost everybody. I thought there would be nobody here by the time I looked up. Blame the dogs. You like Mike Brady too. Okay, good. I'm glad. He does do good stuff. So yeah. Yeah, for now it is, but she should be reefed soon. I don't know. It's unfortunate, again, I really would think that there would be a better option out there. But yeah, we'll see what the story is, on that too. Jack G animations. Yes. I think I've seen his videos before. I have to look that up. That'll be another one too. Our friend Mike Brady. Oh, good. I'm so glad many people here in the chat know that one. That's good. I was worried there wouldn't be enough crossover here between the NASCAR realm and the ocean liner realm. So I'm glad that came up there. But that'll be another one to look at the same time. Alrighty. And okay, let me get into the super chats here too. We'll see where are we actually, where are we with categories? Did anybody else pick their category? We got a couple for teams. I see 2 for teams and 2 for pits. Let's see here. Maybe we'll do pits because I don't think we've done that as much. I think NASCAR and pits we've probably done the least often. Alrighty. I'll read super chats here in a second, too. I'm going to go ahead and get the first question out here. For those of you still tuned in, thank you for watching here. What flag indicates that scoring has been discontinued until further notice? That is the first question. What flag, so what flag waved during a race, indicates that scoring has been discontinued until further notice? That is the first question. Alrighty. And let me check on here. Bowser Jr. XD, thank you for your super chat here for $2. All of my friends are upset for obvious reasons. I don't know how many of them are Christopher Bell fans or not Logano fans. I know, again, Logano not the most popular driver out there and perhaps stirs things up after the Bowman incident last week. But I'll tell you what, if I were Logano after getting this second chance at the championship here, I would have anticipated that, that would have given me extra juice going into this race. Whether or not it was enough on its own, certainly not with the fuel mileage deal that came down to the end of it. But I think he was definitely deserving of being one to watch coming into this, especially given his history winning here and his history of winning here in championship years. But again, it was Christopher Bell's race to lose for most of the day there too. He absolutely drove a flawless race. He just ran out of time. If he had like one more lap, he probably would have got Logano. If he got down to less than, 0.6 of a second, it was that close. It was very, very close. And he drove a hell of a race. And if he does win next week, or if he just points his way into the playoffs here, he will have absolutely deserved it. So we'll find out what happens down there too. So thank you again for the super chat there, for sure. And thank you also for the super chat here for Joseph here, or Joe. I see your comment there as well. For $5, thank you again. With apologies for diverting, do you have any thoughts on Thad Moffat's situation? Good question there. I know we talked about that a little bit there, with him kind of scaling back on the 46. Obviously here on the show, I think we did the show and tell, what was that, last month, where something that was meant to be mailed to him was mailed to me because it was about a thank you gift for a foundation he had donated to. I have no particular problems with Thad Moffat. I haven't interviewed him yet. Maybe that opportunity will present itself further down the line. He does seem like he's certainly had a difficult year this year in the Truck Series, right from the start, with the wreck at the very beginning at Daytona, and trying to work things out with this Faction 46 effort. It seemed like they had a very ambitious deal there to try to, again, start a new team. I'm always very excited to see new teams in the sport. Thad, not necessarily as new of a figure in the sport, given his presence in, other circuits and so forth, before. But, again, any new team that's looking to get up there and kind of, seek their fortune and try to get the best runs they can, maybe build into something that's going to be a long-standing thing. It's always sad when, somebody tries that and then things just don't work out, despite the sponsors they've had and so forth. I'm not going to pretend to understand exactly what the situation was, whether it was just the inexperience of the team or whether it was just bad luck or if it was any inexperience on Thad's part there. Again, it may just be some combination of all of those or none of those. It's really hard to say. But as to himself, or his situation, I guess to answer your question there, Joe, it's kind of like the Hailie Deegan thing, honestly. I would put it in the same category. I mean, here's, a person that I think has unfortunately made a reputation as somebody who just struggles a lot. What do you do with that? It's an unenviable position to be in. And I think even the top drivers of the circuits, whatever division they're in, probably faces that at one point or another. Alex Bowman just this year, even before what happened last week, winning in Chicago and him venting about all the people criticizing him and saying, oh, he doesn't fit in at Hendrick and he's not as successful and, why is he there? And, him, silencing the doubters there. This is a driver for one of the top teams, a guy that worked his way up there and indeed had a period of time where he struggled a lot and wasn't known as being, particularly consistent, driving for Tommy Baldwin, driving for BK Racing. But luckily, things fell out the right way and he found the deal with, driving for Junior's car and, making a name for himself at the team there. And he deserves every bit of respect for what he's accomplished there. But I think that if you look at a lot of racing history, a story closer to Haley Deegan's or Thad Moffat's is probably much more common. A driver that may, on paper, seem to have the skills that they need to get to the next level. They deserve to be out there and get the best shot that they can. But things just don't work out for them. And, and there's a lot of drivers that maybe only made 1 or 2 starts or just a few starts. Thad has had more opportunities than that, getting a full-time ride. It didn't end up getting to the end of the year. We'll see if he turns back up again or maybe finds another way, with another program further down the line, whether it's in trucks, Xfinity, ARCA, anywhere else. That could be the situation for him. But clearly, whatever the situation was at the faction team, it just wasn't working for him or it wasn't working for the team. And I don't know if it was much better at the Young's Motorsports effort, although I think that team in general has just kind of, had kind of a difficult stretch with their own drivers. I mean, Mason Massey, I believe the last car leader, has still kind of had those challenges in the 0-2 entry there as well. So, it's hard to say. It's hard to say. And it could be on one sense to not have enough information out there to make that judgment. But I guess all I can really say is I don't, I feel for him. I feel for him because that's a difficult situation, and I know that in between when you're waiting for deals to come together and you're trying to kind of market yourself and you're trying to point at something and say, hey, I did this and I did that. And, this gives me a chance to get a ride with somebody. I don't know, and then of course you got the connection with the Petty family and trying to work something with that. There's been, varying degrees of success with that, Richie Petty and Mark Petty, seeing them, commemorated in the 75th anniversary this year. And I'm sure that was another part of, what they were marketing with that as well. Indeed, they had that one throwback to Bobby Hamilton's car. There's a lot of different elements at play. But as to, the person himself or his body of work, I just don't have enough in front of me to, really say if this was a expected outcome or if something else is out there. I can just only I would only hope that much like with any other driver, like, say a JJ Yaley that, hops between multiple different teams and has consistently done so for now his whole career, really, or other drivers that maybe made, 1 or 2 starts that we just never heard from them again. Maybe he finds the right spot, the right series he can compete in. Kevin Conway is a Lamborghini champion now. Rick Ware's team, beyond their increased performance in the Cup Series, have kind of branched out into other motorsports as well and found some success out there. I believe the Asian Le Mans Series, they were competing well with Cody Ware. It might just be a matter of, right talent, wrong place, So, but I think that's a struggle that all drivers face. And certainly the pressure, the Petty family aspect of it there, but he's not the only one to bear that burden. And I'm sure there's people around him that are helping him with that too. So hopefully things work out, because again, I think the most exciting thing writing about this sport is, the story that, people take. And it's never all one direction. It's never, he goes from this rank to this rank and he had no problems at all. And he never had any DNFs and he never had any struggles. And then he got to the Cup Series and he won the championship in his first attempt. I think if that ever actually happened to somebody, that would probably be pretty boring. I don't think you'd fully appreciate it. It's all the little detours. It's all the little moments that go from one direction to the next, I think, that make it much more satisfying. Because ultimately that's what life is. It's just not, it's not a really straight path. You can come up with plans as best you can, but things don't always kind of work out that way. And I think for Thad, that's certainly been the case for him this year. So we'll see if there's anything more. I mean, I'm definitely not against hearing more about what happens with him. And I hope that definitely answers your question there as well. But thank you again for the super chat. Oh, goodness. No, thank you for the other super chat there, Joe, as well. Thank you kindly for the being thorough, thoughtful, and fair here. Yeah, I agree. I think that's I'm glad that came across because it's I think that applies to a lot of this. I've had, and I know this wasn't what you were driving at in your question here, but again, I've had things before where what I do with the last place thing, where people maybe aren't entirely sure what my intentions are in terms of talking about these drivers and featuring them in the articles. And it's like, oh, are they getting labeled as like somebody that's always a last place finisher or some, or is this guy, ascribing a different thing to that driver's reality that maybe isn't entirely the picture. And that's why I try to really kind of do that in the articles and really kind of go more into discussing the driver's career as well. Because again, Thad's another perfect example of that. And I think it's worth going into that. And even if it's just a matter of like what new sponsors they bring into the sport, I think that could be interesting too. But it is a challenge because at the end of the day, it's a competitive sport. And, it could be, and when you have bad luck, we saw it out of the playoff contenders just today. It can be just a brutal situation. And it may be one that, maybe drivers question themselves. So again, good question. I appreciate you bringing that up there as well. What flag indicates that scoring has been discontinued until further notice? I saw a lot of you got this as well. The answer is black with white cross. And we do hear about this a lot with pit road speeding penalties when they're not served. And a lot of you got that one there too. Black with the white cross. Jimmy Clements got it. Charles Peterson Jr. Beast of Metal. Oh, yes, I did do super chats there. Bowser Jr. XD. Yeah, I got yours too, right? I did. I see your comment there earlier. I think it might have scrolled up too far. But yes, thank you very much for yours as well. Saying that all your friends are upset for obvious reasons. Are you referencing? You don't have to super chat this. You can just mention it in the chat, of course. But do you mean the Logano win, or like people just not being Logano fans, or is there something else that happened there? But if you don't mind, if you're interested there, feel free. In the meantime, we got we get the next question here. Let's see. And next one. Yeah, these are all flag questions. It's too easy. How about this? Okay, so again, this is as we always mention on the show here, it's a late 90s trivia thing here. So the answer to this question may be different now versus back then, but we'll jump into it here. What is the penalty, or penalty question here? What is the penalty for using excessive speed exiting the pits under green? So again, in the late 90s when this was produced here, what was the penalty for using excessive speed exiting the pits under green? That is the question. Alrighty. Yeah, Beast of Metal, very good point there. Yeah, Scott Speed has done well in Rallycross. Nelson Piquet won the inaugural Formula E title. Yeah, and actually Scott Speed, I was talking with a friend over at the Sears Point infield here just this past year, and it was Scott Speed and Josh Wise walking right there through there, and he recognized him. I'm embarrassed to admit, yeah, he recognized him before I did. I wish I'd recognized him more clearly, but they turned around and it's like, oh goodness, it's like we time warped back to 2009 here. But yeah, both of them being involved as drivers that are advising other teams. I believe they're both with Childress. I think the same way Max Pappas is. But yeah, maintaining a presence there and kind of helping these teams with the road course programs. It's interesting. What's the penalty for using excessive speed exiting the pits under green? We got guesses for stop and go, 15 seconds, 2-lap hold, pass through. Nowadays, pass through, I think it would be the case. But again, we'll see what the situation is here. Eric Banton, I see your comment here as well. Thoughts on Doug Rice calling his last race for PRN? Very cool that you got to meet him at the Brickyard. I've always wanted to meet him. I think we've corresponded briefly before, but I hadn't really. I think the big thing for me is that, again, we've only had a couple of different radio announcers at Sears Point. I remember there was this guy that had this really deep voice, and I forgot who he was. But it was always kind of hard to tell what he was saying, but, because it was kind of the same frequency as the noise of the engines. But I always liked Doug Rice coming on the radio. PRN, the Performance Racing Network. He always had that right cadence to it, coming into and out of the breaks there, and just doing just doing the right thing, actually describing the moments there. Actually, the first video on my channel, actually on this channel here, if you go back to 2006, I believe you hear him on the radio in that, describing that wild starting lap there of, Jamie McMurray spinning out in the top in turn 2, and then the big pile up in the S's there. Again, perfect example of his great play-by-play and a tremendous talent. It's going to be sad to not have him there. Again, I always, you always like to have that familiar tone. I always talk about that, especially with pit reporters, where you're so used to hearing, again, Dr. Dick Bergeron or Matt Yoakum or Dave Burns. Some of them still with us, some of them not active rather, and so forth. But, he's very much the same way. And especially for me, I guess probably the biggest thing was, during COVID, when you had all those races stacked on top of each other, and I was still working night shift at the time, I listened to a lot of the races on the radio. And so I kind of got used to enjoying that a bit more and appreciating that. Certainly when he was covering the SMI tracks there for the PRN network there. But yeah, again, tremendous career. I'm sure whatever he does from here is going to be just as awesome as well. Because again, I think, a person with that history, with witnessing all these moments and being able to cap it off with a tremendous finish like we saw today with Logano and Christopher Bell, and calling that. I'm glad he got to end it on that high of a note. It would have been it wouldn't have been the greatest tragedy, but it wouldn't have been. It was particularly nice that it was something that was allowed to be something pretty exciting there at the end as well. And I'm sure he performed it wonderfully there as he always has. So. I mean, if he does something like what we've seen out of people like Rick Houston at the and Steve Wade over at the Scene Vault podcast, where they've kind of moved from that transition from doing regular media work to their own focus on racing history, I'm sure Doug has plenty that he can contribute to any such discussion there as well. And whatever he does, I'm sure he'll be happy doing it. So wish him a very happy retirement. After the performances this year and all the years in the past as well. Looking at here, what's the penalty for using excessive speed exiting the pits under green? Back then, again, stop and go. Stop and go was the penalty. 611 Hornet, you got it. There you go. And I don't know if anybody else did. 611 Hornet, I think you were the only one got stop and go. But yeah, pass through would be the way it is today. So basically, if you got that, certainly today that would be correct. But if we're looking back then, that would be another one. Joe, that's a very good comment there on Thad Moffitt there as well. Yeah, maybe trying something outside the Petty family as Kyle did with Sabco. That's a very good point. Maybe that's it. Oh, you got it too, Joe. It's a bit of a rough year. Jimmy. Oh, yeah, didn't go too high enough. Yep, Joe, you're right. You did get that, too. Excellent. Good on you, too. There you are. Absolutely. Yeah, so 611 Hornet and Joe, you both got it. There you are. Excellent. Yeah, but no, I definitely agree. I think maybe, Thad trying something different outside the Petty family would probably be good. I mean, it's such a tricky situation when you have a family with that much success and that much of, as you put it, very long shadow, longer than others. That could be a really difficult situation to work with. And, it's cutthroat out there. So we'll see if things work out on that end. Alrighty. All right, next question. We'll just do a couple more here to wrap up. How much horsepower does a 1998 NASCAR Winston Cup Chevy have at 8,500 RPM? Let me read that again. How much horsepower? We're looking for a number. How much horsepower does a 1998 NASCAR Winston Cup Chevy have at 8,500 RPM or 8,500 RPMs? According to little Telltale Neil on the dash. Alrighty. That's true, yeah. Kyle Petty with the Wood Brothers. And actually had, a bit of success. I mean, not just getting them back to victory lane in Richmond, but then, the 600. I I mean, I always identify Kyle Petty with the Sabco effort more than him driving for Petty Enterprises itself. But yeah, that one too. I still got to work my way through Kyle Petty's book. I got a reading stack that's just getting larger and larger this year. I got to just work my way through it. But we're getting there. How much horsepower does a 1998 NASCAR Winston Cup Chevy have at 8,500 RPM? We got guesses for 700, 750, 900, 800. All right, let's see. Here we go. How much horsepower does it have at 8,500 RPM? The answer is 720. 720 is the answer. I don't think anyone got that. We got very close. 700 and 750 and 800. All right. Yeah, very close. 720 it says on here. There you go. Got to bring that up. There it is. Just get us back into focus here. Oh, it's out of focus. Come on. Back into focus. Back into, there we go. Alrighty. Yeah, 720 is what it says. Maybe for Chevy. Maybe that's a twist versus Ford or Pontiac back in the late 90s. Oh, here we go. This is actually appropriate. We'll wrap up with this question because this kind of ties in with last week's race. Since the disqualification happened after the show, of course. The question is, how many pounds heavier is a Winston Cup car than a Busch Series car? How many pounds heavier is a Winston Cup car than a Busch Series car? That is the question. Price is right. Zach Leffler, the highest bid without going over. I like that. Yeah. Highest bid without going over, then yes, I would absolutely put Zachary would have the win on that with the 700. Alrighty. Okay, we got guesses for 100 pounds, 500, 200, 300. Okay, we read it again here. Okay, so again, late 90s rule package, so a little different from now. Certainly with very different cars now, but back in a time where that difference perhaps wasn't quite as massive. Here we go. How many pounds heavier is a Winston Cup car than a Busch Series car? That is our question. What is the answer? The answer is 100. Austin Foster, you got it. Sean Doyle, you got it. Zachary Leffler, you're very close the other direction there. 100 pounds is the answer. That is the one. There you go. Alrighty. Well, Joe, I'm glad you glad you're enjoying the show as a background there as well. Yeah. Always try to keep things pretty relaxed on here. I've been trying to kind of slow, a little bit behind the curtain here. I've been trying to kind of slow down my pace because I've listened to some of my older shows, and it sounds like I'm just trying to ram through as much stuff as possible and just fill the air all the time. I'm trying to just back things off a little bit and just kind of make things a little bit easier. I tend to go really fast. Same thing when I record scripts for videos too. So we'll see how successful that is, or we'll try different things. Or if you guys like it one way or the other, we can certainly work with that there too. But definitely enjoyable talking some racing with you guys here after the races each week. And that will about do it for the show this week. So congratulations again to Joey Logano and AJ Allmendinger for punching their ticket into the playoffs for the Championship 4 with their wins this weekend in Las Vegas. The article on Austin Dillon's last place run will be up here later tonight. That will be on lastcar.info. If you're interested in joining my Patreon, patreon.com/lastcaronbrock. There you get advanced access to videos that both I produce as well as videos that I narrate for NASCAR Man History. We have videos for both that are in the works here in the moment, as well as new videos to the LastCar archives. I did not mention that earlier. More is coming there, especially between now and early December. So keep your eyes peeled on that. If you are in the Patreon, make sure to make full use of your benefits there as well, because I definitely want to make sure you get the entertainment for your money there as well. And Yeah, I think that will about do it here. If you're interested in my Twitter feed, at Last Car on Brock, our next show is going to be next Sunday after the action in Homestead, the first of 3 consecutive triple headers to conclude the NASCAR season for 2024. We're down to, again, we're very close to certificate time here. We're going to have some very interesting stories coming up here. We had a very tumultuous start to the Cup Series round of 8 here, and I'm sure it's going to be even more interesting in these coming days here as well. So stay tuned. Have a great week, everyone, and I'll see you all on next week's show.